I had never expected my life to spiral so low so fast. One moment I was a second-year archaeology student, bright-eyed, obsessed with history, with dreams of unearthing lost cities and forbidden relics. The next moment, debt crushed me under its merciless heel. Eviction notices papered my door like cruel decorations. My phone buzzed endlessly with demands, threats, final warnings. I lived in a crumbling studio apartment. Above a closed-down pawn shop, rats in the walls, mold creeping through the cracked plaster. I scraped by on instant noodles and stolen Wi-Fi nights too long and full of gnawing hunger days bleeding into each other in a haze of fear and desperation, until the ad appeared as if summoned by my misery. No logo, no official listing, just a block of text, simple, cold and promising, exactly what I needed, hiring immediately overnight, cataloger for private collection, generous compensation, discretion, mandatory contact number, below a paycheck large enough to erase half my debts for 1 week's work. It was too good to be true, but good enough to silence my better judgment. When I called, the voice that answered was wrong. Somehow, a voice that didn't match the static on the line or the sick feeling blooming in my stomach. But it promised money up front. No interviews, no questions, just show up at midnight at a location deep in the old industrial district and start work. Something inside me howled against it, but I was starving, drowning, and the thought of losing the tiny scraps of my life left was worse than any vague unease. So I said yes. The night I accepted, I barely slept, staring at the ceiling as strange dreams lapped at the edges of my mind. Black halls stretching forever, rows of statues that breathed when you weren't looking, a massive door sealed shut with chains, and things thudding against it from the other side. But morning came anyway, grey and cold, and by evening I was driving my borrowed junker through crumbling streets, the city falling away behind me as abandoned factories loomed on all sides. The address led to a low iron gate, rusted and heavy. Behind it, a massive stone building squatted like a toad, fat and silent and wrong. The only light was a dim yellow glow leaking from one cracked window. I killed the engine heart hammering and stepped into the icy air. The gate opened on its own, squealing like an animal in pain. A woman waited inside, tall, gaunt, her face hidden by a wide black veil. She handed me a clipboard with a trembling skeletal hand, and without speaking pointed to the doors as they creaked open on ancient hinges. The clipboard had only 2 things printed on it: a short welcome and the rules: obey them completely or be claimed. They said below was the list. Rule 1, never enter a room if the door is already open. Rule 2, do not under any circumstance touch any artifact without gloves. Rule 3, if you hear heavy breathing behind you, do not turn around. Rule 4, if an exhibit moves, catalogue it exactly as it appears and record the time. Rule 5, you must clock out before sunrise, even if it means leaving work undone. I wanted to laugh, but my skin crawled and the air smelled of iron and rot. I nodded, stuffed the clipboard into my jacket and stepped inside the museum. The door slamming shut behind me, the woman gone, the lock turning with a sound like a tomb sealing itself. The interior was worse than the outside, rows upon rows of display cases pressed close together. Artifacts that looked far too real. Bones, knives, crowns woven from hair. I pressed the gloves onto my shaking hands and moved deeper. Following the tiny map provided, the job was simple in theory. Find an object, match it to the list mark. Any changes easy enough for a night. But the deeper I went, the colder it got. The displays seemed to lean toward me, shadows curling at the edges of my vision, and always the feeling of being watched gnawed at my spine. In those early hours, I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, sleep deprivation, and fear making me jumpy. The rules were stupid superstitions made by paranoid collectors. I kept my head down, logged everything exactly as instructed, and told myself over and over that the paycheck would make it all worth it. But deep down, a small voice whispered that no amount of money could ever pay for what I was breathing. What was breathing me in return, and I knew I was already trapped. The museum's hunger wrapping itself around my soul, and squeezing slow and patient like a snake waiting for my first mistake. Before we dive deeper into tonight's terrifying story, if you're enjoying this descent into darkness, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and share this video with your bravest friends. It really helps keep the horrors coming. Now back to the nightmare. I don't know when the breathing started. At first, it was so faint I thought it was the old ventilation system gasping for air. But no matter where I moved in that rotting museum, the breathing followed, slow, wet rasping, like a dying animal. Too heavy, too deliberate. I pressed myself against the cracked glass of an exhibit labeled The Vessel of Dreams, a tarnished silver urn wrapped in chains, even though the artifact rules said not to touch the cases. I couldn't help it. Some desperate part of me thinking maybe the solid surface could shield me from whatever was breathing behind me. But the glass was cold, wet, pulsing like living flesh. I jerked away, heart hammering, and that's when I heard it. A soft click, like nails tapping on stone, followed by a dragging sound growing louder with each heartbeat. The rules screamed in my mind. Rule 3. If you hear breathing behind you, do not turn around no matter what. But I was a fool, a terrified idiot, and my instincts overpowered my reason. I turned slowly, feeling the air grow thick around me, and I saw it crouched at the end of the hallway just outside the pool of flickering light, an enormous shape, twisted limbs too long, too thin its face, a mass of stitched-together shadows. 2 eyes glowed from the depths of its ruined head, oily and empty, and fixed directly on me. I stumbled backward, biting down a scream, clutching the clipboard like it could save me. But the thing didn't move, it just watched breathing. That awful heavy breathing rattling through the hallway. I turned and ran, not caring about stealth anymore, crashing past displays, knocking over ancient relics, hearing the shriek of something waking behind the walls. I sprinted until my lungs burned, until I found myself in a new wing of the museum. 1. I didn't recognize 1. Not marked on the tiny map. The air here was wrong, colder, thicker, like walking underwater. The exhibits here were different. Not artifacts, but things displayed like art hunks of bone, still slick with blood teeth, too large to be human things, with too many limbs, too many eyes, and every single display case had been shattered. Something had broken free. I stumbled forward, trying to find my way back to the main hall, but the museum kept twisting corridors, shifting displays, rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking, and always the breathing followed, always just behind me, but never close enough to catch me. Yet I remembered the rules, clinging to them like a drowning man. Rule 5, clock out before sunrise. No matter what sunrise would save me, I just had to survive until then. But the clocks had all stopped frozen at 2:13 a.m., the time dragging on endlessly. I passed a mirror labeled the Oracle's Eye, an artifact I hadn't logged yet. The glass was black, oily, and something deep inside it pressed against the surface like a bloated hand straining to reach through. I hurried past, refusing to look, refusing to acknowledge it. But the mirror whispered as I passed, promising safety, promising escape. If only I broke the rules. If only I looked. If only I let it in. I pressed on deeper into the shifting corridors. My hands numb, my mouth dry, every step heavier than the last, as if the building itself was weighing me down. Then, without warning, the lights failed, plunging everything into suffocating darkness. I froze, barely breathing, listening to the heavy shuffling footsteps closing in behind me. Closer, closer, the breathing now a wet gurgling inches from my ear. Something brushed the back of my neck, slimy and cold and wrong, and I knew that if I stayed frozen, I would die. Here become another exhibit, another trophy in this nightmare. So I ran, blind arms outstretched, crashing into unseen obstacles, cutting myself on unseen edges. Somewhere deep inside the museum, something laughed, a sound that curdled my blood and hollowed out my chest. I ran until my legs gave out, until my body collapsed against a heavy iron door. One I hadn't seen before, carved into the stone, was a single phrase: "No entry, not ever." Hands shaking. I pushed it open and fell inside. The door slammed shut behind me, locking with a sound like a tomb. sealing forever. And for a moment, just a moment, everything was silent. I struggled to my knees, blinking into the dark, trying to see where I was. This room was different. Colder ancient rows of shelves stretched into the blackness, each shelf crammed with artifacts older than time. Artifacts that pulsed with hunger, with hate, with longing. A sign hung crookedly above the nearest shelf. Cataloging room. Forbidden access violation. Results in immediate termination. But it was too late. I was already inside, and the museum knew it. Something in the dark took notice of me. The air shifted, grew heavy, grew alive. I staggered to my feet, heart pounding, staring into the endless rows of cursed objects. And that's when I heard it, not breathing, not footsteps, but the slow, deliberate sound of something enormous waking up. Something that had been waiting patiently for a fool like me. And deep in my chest, I knew the night was far from over, and escape was no longer a guarantee. The moment I stumbled deeper into the forbidden cataloging room, I knew something had shifted permanently. Reality itself seemed thinner, stretched like old skin over brittle bone. The air was wrong, too heavy, too alive. Every breath I took tasted of rust and rot, and the darkness wasn't empty. It was thick and teeming. I could feel unseen eyes sliding over my skin, caressing me with icy hunger. From somewhere deep between the shelves, a low groan rumbled, shaking the floor beneath my feet. I forced myself to move, stepping carefully between towering displays of ancient relics, artifacts that pulsed with a heartbeat of their own, things that should have been buried and forgotten, things that wanted out. My flashlight flickered madly, casting long, twitching shadows on the walls, shadows that didn't match my movements. I kept my gaze down, avoiding the shelves, avoiding the glint of impossible objects that seemed to watch me back. But no matter how careful I was, I could feel it growing closer. The ancient thing that had been disturbed, something beyond time, something that the museum itself had imprisoned. I tripped over a crack in the stone floor, crashing against a shelf, my gloved hand brushing something cold, something slick. A sound like 1,000 whispering mouths erupted from the darkness. The shelves shuddered and shifted as if something enormous was slithering between them. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, and bolted deeper into the labyrinth of cursed history. Each step echoed unnaturally loud, bouncing back at me, distorted and wrong. The breathing returned louder, heavier than ever. And this time it wasn't behind me. It was above me. I dared a glance up and nearly screamed there in the crumbling ceiling. A massive shape slithered, grotesque and slick, its body a tapestry of stitched skin and bone. Its head a mass of writhing tendrils that brushed the tops of the shelves as it hunted me, its mouth a gaping black hole filled with teeth like broken glass. I tore my gaze away and ran, dodging between the shelves, hearing artifacts crash to the ground behind me, shattering and releasing their long-trapped nightmares. The museum groaned around me, walls buckling, floors cracking the air. Vibrating with an ancient rage, I stumbled into a wide-open space in the center of the labyrinth, a domed chamber where a single pedestal stood at its heart. Atop the pedestal, an artifact unlike any other, a mirror, framed in twisted bone. The glass rippling like water. Even in the darkness, carved into the floor around it were words in a language I didn't know, but somehow understood. The reset, the escape, the cost, and I realized this was it. The reset artifact, the only way to survive. But as I stepped closer, the mirror pulsed violently, a blast of icy wind knocking me to my knees from the shadows. The ancient thing slithered into view, blocking every exit. It was massive, bloated, a patchwork of horrors stitched together into a form too awful for sanity to survive. It reared up, dripping with some black, foul-smelling ichor, and the museum itself seemed to tremble in fear around it. I knew with bone-deep certainty that it would not let me reach the mirror, not without paying a price. I crawled forward, scraping my palms bloody on the rough stone floor. The thing let out a deafening roar, a sound so full of hate and hunger that my vision blurred and blood poured from my ears. I pressed on, sobbing, gasping, as the weight of its malice crushed down on me, inching closer to the pedestal. The mirror's surface now boiling, writhing with images of impossible places of screaming faces trapped in eternal torment. I reached the base and with shaking hands touched the mirror's frame. It was alive, pulsing under my fingers, hungry, desperate, and it spoke to me not in words, but in pure feeling, in promises and threats, in visions of what would happen if I failed. It showed me my fate, trapped forever in the museum. A living exhibit my soul gnawed on by ancient things, until I was nothing but a hollow shell. It showed me the cost to activate the reset. The sacrifice needed my freedom in exchange for something else. A trade I didn't understand but didn't question, because there was no time. The creature screamed and lunged toward me impossibly fast, its tendrils snapping through the air. I pressed my bloodied hand against the mirror's surface and screamed a single desperate plea to whatever powers would listen. Save me. The mirror shattered outward in a blast of searing light, and for one agonizing moment, the museum was gone. The ancient thing was gone. The endless labyrinth was gone, and I was falling through a black void where the only sound was my own heartbeat and the faint, distant whisper of something laughing at me. Not with me, at me. The ground slammed into me with bone-jarring force, and I lay there, gasping, sobbing, realizing I was outside the museum, lying on the cracked concrete of the industrial district under a blood-red dawn. The gate was gone. The building was gone. Only a gaping pit remained where the museum had once squatted like a malignant toad. I staggered to my feet, my body broken, my mind teetering on the edge of madness, clutching the shattered remains of the clipboard still glued to my hand. The rules now rewritten in a language I couldn't read, a language that writhed and shifted whenever I looked at it. And somewhere deep inside me, I knew I hadn't truly escaped, not completely, not ever. The museum had let me go because I had given it something else, something it had wanted more than me, and it was only a matter of time before it came to collect the rest. For a while I thought I had escaped, but freedom was a lie, a fragile fantasy, because even as I staggered away from the ruins of the museum, I could feel it in my bones. The wrongness, the infection, the thing I had brought with me clinging to my soul like a second skin. The air around me was colder than it should have been. Shadows flickered and twisted at the edges of my vision. Even when there was no light to cast them, the city looked the same. But the people didn't. Their faces blurred when I tried to focus, their eyes hollow and leaking black tears that hissed when they touched the ground. They moved like puppets yanked by invisible strings, jerky, broken laughing, with mouths stretched too wide, their laughter following me wherever I went. I locked myself in a cheap motel room, bolted the door, stuffed towels under the windows, and still the world outside pressed against the glass, whispered through the cracks, called to me in a language older than sound. I barely slept when I did. I dreamed of the museum. Not as it was, but as it would be, sprawling, expanding, devouring entire cities, dragging reality itself into its festering heart. I dreamed of the ancient thing coiled in the void beneath it, waiting patient, its hunger. Endless, I would wake to find marks on my skin. Strange sigils burned into my flesh, fading before I could understand them. The rules were changing, adapting to me, rewriting themselves in the dark. I found a new set of instructions scrawled on the motel bathroom mirror. Rule 1. Never answer the phone if it rings. Rule 2. Never open the door if someone knocks. Rule 3. Never look into the mirror after midnight. Rule 4. Never fall asleep with the lights off. Rule 5. If you hear the music, you are already too late, and sure enough that night the phone rang, shattering the silence, vibrating the whole room with its shrill insistence. I didn't answer. But the thing on the other side kept calling, whispering promises, threats begging me to pick up to listen to what waited on the other end. The knocks came. Next soft at first, then louder, then violent like fists hammering bone. Splintering under the force, I pressed my back against the door, shaking, whispering prayers I barely remembered from childhood. The mirror across the room darkened, warped, showing not my reflection, but a grinning mockery. A twisted version of myself, whose mouth peeled open wider and wider until it split the face in half. I smashed the mirror with a chair, but the cracks in the glass only multiplied the laughing faces, each shard a window into someplace worse. The lights flickered, guttered, almost died. I huddled in the center of the room, clutching the broken chair leg, like it could fight back against the things coming for me. And then I heard it faint at first, but growing louder, tinny, discordant. The sound of a music box playing a song I knew without knowing how the same song that had played in the museum, just before the creature had awoken, and I knew the rules had caught up with me. I had broken them, and there would be no second chances. The shadows in the corners of the room began to move, crawling upward, forming hands, faces, mouths, whispering my name in voices, not my own. I screamed and bolted for the window, throwing myself through the glass, just as the door exploded inward in a spray of splinters and blackness. The fall shattered something inside me, maybe my ribs, maybe my mind, but I crawled away, bleeding, leaving pieces of myself on the asphalt. The world outside was wrong. Twisted the sky, a boiling mass of crimson clouds, the buildings bending and warping like wax figures in a furnace. I ran blind, not knowing where I was going, just knowing that if I stopped, if I hesitated, the museum would claim me again. Dragging me back into its endless halls, I stumbled into an alleyway, heart-hammering blood filling my mouth. And there in the center of the cracked concrete was a door, a freestanding door, no frame, no wall, just a rotting wooden door marked exit with a symbol carved into the wood, the same symbol that had burned itself into my skin in the motel. Without thinking, without hesitating, I threw the door open and stepped through. The world snapped, stretched, twisted into impossible shapes. I felt myself unraveling, bones melting, mind splitting apart. I screamed, but there was no sound, no breath, no air. And then suddenly I was somewhere else, lying on soft grass under a black sky, filled with cold, silent stars. The city, the motel, the museum all gone. I was in a field that stretched forever in every direction, silent still but whole and untouched, a place outside the reach of the horror I had escaped from. For now I staggered to my feet, tears streaming down my face, gasping for air under that alien sky. I was alive, broken, but alive. The museum hadn't followed me here, not yet. But deep down in the hollow place left behind by my terror, I knew it was still hunting me. It was always hunting those who escaped its walls, and it never ever gave up. I looked at my shaking hands, at the strange mark still burning faintly on my skin, and I knew the rules weren't done with me. Not by a long shot. Survival was just another beginning, and somewhere far away in a place where time didn't flow, the ancient thing stirred in its slumber, sniffing the wind, tasting the thread that still connected me to its labyrinth and smiling in the dark.